Book of Ka, Episode 4, Destiny's Edge. Zashi watched the distant figures following his path. It was a Triad, one of those teams of specialized killers that were sent out to recover or assassinate enemies of the Raw. They wore black robes over steel armor, and each carried sword and dagger. With the sun to his back and near to setting, Zashi doubted the three would have seen him, but he didn't want to take any chances, so he lay close upon the sand. The Triads were reputed to be soulless killers, men who'd sold their souls for skills that could overcome any prey they were set to. Better to confront your enemy than to ignore and catch a blade when you least expect it, the former monk told himself. "What's that?" Winn asked as she lay next to him, watching the three figures in the distance. "A Triad. We won't be able to outrun them," Zashi told the girl. "Keep going with the car. I'll catch up to you." She eyed him skeptically. "There are 3 of them. Can you survive?" She shook her head. "I'll need to help you." He turned and smiled at the girl. "You cannot help," he told her, forcing an arrogance and confidence in his tone that he didn't feel. "I'll exploit their weaknesses," he told her. "Which are?" she asked. "Anger, fear," he whispered. "Their tools are their greatest weakness. I will have to exploit them." She looked doubtful, but agreed. "If you don't catch up by the morning, I'll come back for you." He shook his head, his top-knot swaying in the dry desert air. "If I do not catch up to you by morning, I will surely be dead." She frowned at him. "Just keep going," he told the girl. "Wherever this thing is pulling us, it's close. I can feel it. Something is close." "I'm not sure that our time in the desert will ever end," she argued. "And I don't want to continue alone." "The destination is close," he told her, "and all the more reason I must stop this Triad. They must not see whatever it is, must not be able to report back," he told her. She just nodded and made her way to the mule and led him into the evening twilight as Zashi continued to think about his options. After the girl had gone and was out of sight, Zashi stoked a little fire and began to meditate, waiting for the Triad to make their way to where he sat. They seemed to have made their way across the waste toward him like an arrow set upon its target. Clinking armor and harsh breathing brought the young man out of his meditations. Before opening his eyes, he spoke. "Just one? They only send one Triad." "Miramo Kazashi," an emotionless, deep voice spoke. "You are to be taken back to the Citadel, under guard, to stand trial for the murder of 3 men. Surprised caused Zashi to snap his eyes open. He was sure the guards weren't hurt, and there'd only been 2. The 3 men of the Triad looked intimidating now that they stood before him. They were identical, all 3 having the same squat, overly muscular builds, each sporting overhanging brows and clean-shaven, bulky jaws. Their eyes were dead, black, as if their souls were no longer in residence. "And just who have I been accused of murdering, may I ask?" Zashi stood very slowly. 2 guards and a monk, one of the masters of the order." The one in the center spoke, his fellows taking positions to left and right of him. "Monk?" Zashi demanded, feeling his anger rise. He slowly pushed it back. "Which master did I supposedly kill?" "Through your actions, 2 guards and Master Ito of the Order of the Rings were put to death by order of the Raw. Noting the rage that flashed over Zashi's vishes, he continued with a wicked smile, though his tone remained almost emotionless. Ito's body still hangs above the entrance to his monastery. We will allow you to visit him before we throw you in a cell. The grim warrior finished and looked sinister, considering the lack of life in the armored man's eyes. Struggling to push down his rage, Zashi sought to let it go. Let the peace of the moment, the stark yet beautiful desert fill him. The power that called to him seemed to touch his soul, if just for a moment. The sense of calm all men who understood the deep art of warfare found so necessary washed over him. I am Miramo Kazashi. I am without blade, for I have rejected the law. If you wish to take me, you will have to kill me. Yet be warned, I will do my best to destroy you and the vile corruption you leave upon this world. He knew it was mostly bluster, but he also knew his only chance, unarmed and unarmored, was to play to his strengths, his speed, his calm demeanor, his training. Let his enemies be weighed down with their own fear and rage. He'd given them a reason for anger. He'd give them something to fear. Without any warning, Zashi struck, his foot coming up to strike the man before him in the throat, just under his chin. He felt the windpipe break under the ball of his foot. As he spun to take the next guard with another kick from his back foot, he felt a sharp pain run across his side. The distinct feeling of pain and cracking filled Zashi's brain. He had no time to dwell on that pain, forcing it aside as he had been trained and conditioned to do. His foot struck nothing and let it follow through and allow him to pivot again and leap in the back foot away from the third warrior. One down, he thought, and turned back toward the man. But he was wrong. The man he'd struck in the throat seemed to gather himself and stand. Well, that just isn't fair, he said aloud, chuckled, and began bouncing, ready for the next charge. The all three drew their swords and daggers. Swords were sleek, curved blades like those used by the Order, but their daggers were evenly pulled, curved and ribboned, so that if one stab twisted and ripped out of a man's body, all sorts of insides would come with it. Blood dripped down Zashi's side from the long wound that ran across his ribs. At least two were broken. He could feel them rubbing bone against bone under his broken skin. He shunted the pain away again and let his training and instincts come over him. But then something very strange happened. Something he'd never experienced before. That power, that strange spirit that called him across the desolate desert, seemed to fill him. He felt more than he saw what would happen next. The feeling came like an echoing thing, showing him several different scenarios the Triad might choose in their individual attacks, all at the same time. And unconsciously, Zashi knew that he would have to determine which of the actions they would take in mere fractions of seconds. He stepped forward as an opponent directly before him slashed down toward his head. He caught the man's wrist and twisted, throwing it. Coming up with the thrown man's sword, he dodged, avoiding a cruel dagger thrust from his left. And as he backed away, he stabbed the slender blade that he had taken back behind him, scoring a hit cutting into the last man's breastplate, into his body. He released the sword, leaving it into his opponent's chest, and spun, availing the follow-up slash from the second opponent. It was almost easy, since his dodge had put the man out of reach. He spun and came to a stop, his opponents facing him once again. One down, he said again, confirming, watching the third warrior who had dropped to the desert floor. Again, he felt what would happen and waited for the proper moment. He could feel the rage coming from his remaining opponents. They would make mistakes now. He knew it. Again, he felt more than saw what would happen next and waited for a proper moment. The two men stepped back and moved to opposing sides of Zashi. This caused him to smile. The man on his left fainted forward, expecting the young man to turn toward him. Instead, Zashi stepped back, his premonition true, and then took a double step, grabbing the second man lunging sword by the hilt and tripping the opponent. He ducked as the other opponent, who had fainted, swung and leaped for him, raising his blade so that the man split his head upon his stolen blade with only his own momentum. The bright blade gouged into the man's forehead, cracking deep into the brow ridge, knocking him out as he tumbled to the ground. The sword should not have been able to penetrate his skull so easily, but it did. Zashi leapt back, slicing through the unconscious warrior's throat as he did so. "I will gut you, boy," the last man growled as he got to his feet. He had both sword and dagger ready. "Perhaps in the next woe," Zashi smirked. "I will honor you as best I can," he finished. The man stalked forward, low and cautious. "Even if you prevail here today, another will come, and another until you are dead. May the Raw lose as many men and spirits allow. It'll be a mercy to them," Zashi responded. "I am unconcerned. This life will lead where it will." Fainting, with his left hand, the man brought a dagger up towards Zashi's belly. Unfortunately for Zashi, he misjudged the possible actions of the man and felt the hook-bladed dagger dragged across his belly, ripping and chewing through his skin. Zashi, gasping, twisted away from the pain and brought the hilt of his stolen blade down upon the brute's head. His own pain was too much now to just shut away on his own. The power, whatever it was, fled from him, and he stood hunched in that pain, the greater coming from the jagged cut across his middle, more than his broken ribs. "Nice," he groaned at the last member of the Triad. "I'll give you a choice. Go tell the Raw that we aren't worth the trouble and keep your life, or die here and now and let whatever is left of your soul dwell in darkness." The brute laughed, and that laughter seemed more sinister since there was no light in the man's eyes. "You have the same choice. Surrender or die here." Zashi moved before the brute finished his offer and slashed the blade at the man's side, but that wasn't his real target. But just before it would strike the blocking blade of his opponent, he spun, pulling it back around, and drove that blade deep under the armpit of the warrior and then deep into his neck. The warrior took a step back, pulling the blade free of Zashi's hands as he did so. What? The man tried to speak. "How?" He groaned as he went to his knees, both blades falling from his own hands. "May the spirits have mercy on your poor, pathetic soul, and may your next life be far less violent," Zashi said with sincere regret in his tone. He took the blade sticking out of the body of the first man he had slain. "Honor to you all," Zashi said before he struck the man's head from the rest of his body. Looking down at the sword in his hands, he fell to his own knees, his head swimming. "It is a terrible thing to kill," he thought to himself, "to take potential from the world, no matter the reason." He finished just before his world went dark.